Hello and welcome to the very final edition of Paris Games. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing all things Paralympics as the Games come to an end. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in studio by Gemma Stevenson, a wheelchair tennis player and coach, as well as broadcast journalist. Jean-Emile Jammine is also here from our sports desk. We'll also be crossing live to James Vasina at the Stade de France, as well as Cami Knight, who's standing by at Club France. Well, let's get started, shall we? We're going to cross straight to the Stade de France to James Vasina. James, firstly, you've covered every day of these Paralympic Games for us. What have you made of the last 11 days of sporting action?
The last 11 days, Leo, I'd say it's been extremely vibrant. The atmosphere in the venues has been electric. It was a surprise at the beginning, I think, for all of us to see that, and everybody was to see that fever had transferred from the Olympics into the Paralympics. We knew, of course, it was the end of the holidays for the French, and there was a bit of worry that things might not continue that way, but they did, even once the children went back to school and everybody went back to work, and that was a real pleasure. It was vibrant, it was great fun to watch, it was a true pleasure just to be able to see so many athletes competing in so many different places, knowing that these are athletes who don't get this kind of exposure normally, and this is what a lot of athletes have been saying, that they're not used to getting all these cheers from the crowds, having so much, and for the French getting crowd support from the French, and that support, as we've said plenty of times, wasn't only at all, it was not reserved to the French athletes. Yes, as soon as the French athletes entered the arena, the track, the pool, well, the places just went up, just erupted with cheers. But that was, in fact, everybody got this support for every single athlete, and that was really, really great to see. It was also, there was that impressive side of just to see athletes like Igor Buki just explode and take his Paralympic record to further heights. 5 gold medals in these Paralympic Games. And while these athletes at these games do not want to be considered super athletes, they've made that very clear. They want to be considered normal people, just like anybody else, and normal athletes, and want to be judged on those performances. I can't say that it hasn't been humbling, because you cannot, in our position, you cannot project yourself, not compare anything and just put yourselves in their shoes and understand and try to understand what they're living and what it is like for them. So when you see when you see the effort that's put in there, and you think that the amount of the amount of training in every single discipline, it is something, because this is a stage to these last few weeks. We've had the cameras has been on these para-athletes, but not normally, and in normal life. We know that as of tomorrow, it's back to normal life for these athletes, and that normal life, as has been made very clear, is one of a lot of struggle, not only, but it is a lot of struggle, and this is what the Paralympic Games are here for, to try and bring awareness and try and change things. That's, of course, we're going to be discussing this over, of course, the next hour, about the impact the Paralympic Games have, just about the legacy and have on the cities and the countries. But that is going to be one of the big criteria to overlook, and that has been definitely something that we've been able to understand, and to see something like that for everybody here watching. It was the first time that we got to witness the Para-athletics, the Paralympics here in Paris, and what a joy it's been to watch.
You're, of course, at the Stade de France. We can see you in front of it there. That's where the closing ceremony will be getting underway in about an hour's time. Give us a taste of what we can expect tonight.
Well, you're going to have in here 60,000 people, fans who've come here and bought tickets, turning into what's going to be turned into, they're planning a big party. They want to turn the Stade de France into a giant nightclub. Now, what are they doing for that? Well, they're going to be they're bringing in 24 French DJs. This is about trying to bring French culture to the fore, as they've been doing in the past ceremonies. 24 French DJs, all the way from Jean-Michel Jarre, the man who, this is all about electronic music in this one, who set the pace for electronic music back in the 70s and 80s, to today's Martin Solveig's, Cassius, and others. 24 DJs who will be coming back with music in the Stade de France, as well as light shows. And one of the plans for this ceremony is to also try and shorten a little bit and avoid some of the lengthy passages that have been in the last ceremonies, which have been a little bit criticised about that. But that is the plan for tonight. There's also, of course, going to be the transfer over to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, who'll be hosting the next Olympics and Paralympics in 4 years' time. So all of that coming up then as you mentioned, just about an hour's time at the Stade de France for the final events of the Olympics and the Paralympics. It's all ending today.
Well, James, thank you very much. We'll be crossing back to you a little bit later on, so don't go anywhere. Well, the action is done and dusted. All the medals have been handed out. So let's take a look at that final medal table. China out on top as expected, but let's look at France. 8th place, 19 gold medals. Jean-Emile, let me bring you in on this one. The goal for France before these games was 20 gold. They're one short of that. Their other goal was top 8. They've achieved that. Will France be happy with these Paralympic Games?
I think a firm, resounding yes. It's a solid yes. It's not exceeding expectations. It's bang on point. And they have done specifically well in the paracycling events. Just the target was between 20 and 30 medals for that. They've managed to bring in 28 amongst their cyclists. Not so great on the track, it has to be said. The likes of Nantenan Keita, who was a hopeful after her exploits in Rio. She came up short. She came 6th in her race in the 400 meters. That's one thing she might have dominated, but certainly on the track, I mean, we saw incredible exploits by the French athletes. I'm just thinking the likes of Joigny, Bosredon, Lotte, all in the men's cycling. Only 3 women gold medalists, but it is still 3 more than what we saw in Tokyo as well. And that was something that Marie-Amélie Le Four, the Paralympic president, actually brought up and said that there has been a lot of progress made as well. In terms of the French spectators and the crowds that James was talking about, it really has caught on, and we have to talk about the success there because 90% of the tickets sold were to the French crowd, and it's 2.5 million tickets. I'm sure you're going to touch on that in just a bit, but it was all to see these brilliant athletes, and one specific one, Aurélie Aubert, I have to mention her, the cerebral palsy athlete who won the gold medal in the women's Bochia, that phenomenal type of bowls that we see all around the Jardin de Luxembourg and many places in Paris, and now it's been brought out onto the Paralympic stage. So really, I think France can be quite happy with what they've achieved.
Well, one person who's part of that 10%, because not French, but at a lot of events, Gemma Stevenson. First of all, Gemma, thanks so much for coming on the show. Secondly, when we look at that medal table, GB second by some margin. As expected, we knew they'd come second. How are GB so successful when it comes to para sport? Because they far outperform their population, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's how seriously they take the development programme. So in the UK, when we develop athletes, actually now we're taking them younger and younger and younger. So if you look at wheelchair tennis, the LTA in the UK are looking at kids who are 9, 10 years old to start putting on, programmes that will get them ready to be podium potential, in 10, 15 years' time. Because, I mean, if you look at wheelchair tennis, there is, you saw it in the medal results. There's 3 major nations. It's Japan, Netherlands and Great Britain. And they all have a great kind of start, a great junior programme. I think some sports that we excel at, it's because of the programme as a whole. It's because they've made the programme inclusive. So as well, because if you look at the cycling, we do well in the cycling in the Olympics as well. And we do well in the cycling in the Paralympics because that's a whole inclusive programme where Paralympians and Olympians train together.
So they're not separated. The Olympians and Paralympians train at the same time, and that's why both are successful. Yeah,
they train in the same centres. They're allowed access to the same facilities. If you play wheelchair tennis or if you play tennis, you're allowed access to the National Tennis Centre. I think the velodrome was actually quite an interesting one because it was a lot steeper than a lot of velodromes that a lot of the cyclists train in. And also, the hottest velodrome I've ever been in. So the times that we were seeing at the velodrome were ridiculous, but it was partly to do with how steep that velodrome was and how hot it was in there.
Yeah. Well, as we've heard, there's been success for France in the sporting arena, but also outside at Club France, which has been a massive feature of this summer. It's the last night tonight, and Cami Knight is very lucky to be there for us, experiencing one of the best parties in Paris. Cami, what's the atmosphere like where you are? It certainly looks like one big party.
Yeah, I was going to tell you that the party's going to start later, but I was completely wrong because we're just currently witnessing a Colombian dance show, which is pretty exceptional, and it just gives you a taste of kind of the atmosphere that is this incredible place. You know, it's the last day, so you really feel like everyone's kind of trying to make the most of it and enjoy the last few hours of this place. You know, during the day there were more kind of sporting activities outdoors, people playing some wheelchair tennis or wheelchair basketball, but of course tonight also they're going to be screening the closing ceremony on the big screen right here, so a lot of people have come to watch this, and that's why we won't be seeing some of the athletes straight away, but they'll be coming straight from the Stade de France to Club France at about 1 a.m. we're expecting them, the whole French delegation, and they'll be, you know, keeping the party going here. Exceptionally, it's going to close at 5 a.m. Today, or should I say tomorrow, so definitely a lot of partying going on here.
A late one at Club France. I expect Cami Knight to be there all the way until 5 a.m. But Cami, talk to me more about Club France for our viewers who maybe don't know, because it's really been at the heart of Paris 2024 for both the Olympics and Paralympics, hasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you say, it's really been the beating heart, at least of French fandom here in Paris. And it really made a name for itself during the Olympics, and organisers really wanted to keep that momentum going throughout the Paralympics. They made a few changes, so they reduced capacity to 10,000 people, but that's fully booked tonight. No tickets available left. They made the tickets free, and they've made infrastructure slightly more accessible. But otherwise, you know, the spirit is exactly the same as it's been. It's been a place where the public can really meet the athletes once the pressure of performance has kind of eased off, where athletes can come and really bask in their glory and come down this runway that you can see actually right behind me. You know, just earlier we saw Nelia Barbosa come and celebrate her silver medal in the canoeing. So yeah, it's just been absolutely phenomenal, and I know a lot of people are going to be very upset that it's coming to an end.
Cami, enjoy yourself, but not too much, because we'll be back with you in about 20 minutes or so. Well, since we have Gemma in the studio, of course, we have to talk about wheelchair tennis. Gemma, player, coach, you're at Roland Garros all week covering the wheelchair tennis as a journalist. I mean, I know you go every year to Roland Garros, but it's an incredible venue to have a Paralympic wheelchair tennis tournament, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's an important venue to have it at because, you know, you're using the stadium that's known in Paris for tennis as a whole. You know, every June, everybody tunes in to watch the action, whether it's the pedestrian players, the standing players, or whether it's the wheelchair tennis players. And yeah, it's so important to have wheelchair tennis at a venue like that, and to have those finals that we had yesterday. I mean, that men's singles final on Philippe Chartrier in men's. I mean, Alfie Hewitt said it, but I will also say it. I think that match will be remembered for a long, long time.
In terms of atmosphere, is that as good as you've seen for a wheelchair tennis match?
Oh, yeah. Atmosphere, the drama in the match as well. And the crowds were behind. 1 minute they were shouting Alfie's name. Next minute they were shouting Taquito's. And, you know, what you've got to realise is for wheelchair tennis, actually the players don't see crowds like that 99% of the time. So rather like the ATP Tour and the WTA Tour, there is the ITF Tour for wheelchair tennis players. They're playing week in, week out. And sometimes it's like one man and his dog there watching them, and then me there as a journalist. So I feel like one of the legacies from this Games is there were so many people watching that match between Alfie Hewitt and Taquito Oda. And it was a very high quality match. And one of the arguments for not putting them on the big stages is nobody will come and watch it. I think last night proved people will come and watch wheelchair tennis because they recognise it for what it is. It's just tennis.
I want to talk about Japan's success, because gold in the men's and women's singles, as well as the women's doubles. For the first time, they topped the medal table in the sport. Why have Japan become so strong in the sport? Is there any impact from Tokyo 2016, or is it completely separate?
So I think Japan have been strong in sport. So Yui Kimiji has been quite high up in the rankings for a long, long, long time now. I think you've had athletes before Yui and Taquito, Shingo Kaneda, arguably in the men's game. I'm going to say in the men's game, were the GOAT. of wheelchair tennis in the men's game. You know, he won 50 Grand Slam titles, and you know, he won the gold medal in Tokyo, and he's set a legacy that means that the youngsters coming up have somebody to look up to and somebody who succeeded from Japan. And I think that's been really helpful. I think the countries that do really well in certain parasports have had that person who's gone above and beyond, because Shingo wasn't just a tennis player. He did a lot for the sport in Japan. He did a lot to kind of build the profile of disability sport as a whole, so not just wheelchair tennis.
It's about visibility of those athletes for those, and inspiring younger para-athletes.
Yeah, it's like I spoke to Johnny Peacock after he came fifth in the T64 100-metre sprint earlier in the week, and his argument was like he's been campaigning for a decade because you can have disability sports events in the Diamond League in the athletics, but it's up to host cities whether they do it, and also they're put on 5 minutes before the main action, where the spectators are still walking in and the cameras aren't even rolling.
So is it a bit of an afterthought?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, it needs to be genuinely inclusive. So you can't say that you're inclusive if the kind of para-athletes haven't really featured on any, even in the broadcast window. It's not, you can't say you're inclusive. And that's what I've seen Johnny Peacock campaign for years, really, genuine inclusion in events like that. And I think that's what wheelchair tennis has, genuine inclusion in the Grand Slams. If you look at it, and also some of the ATP Tour events, we now have a wheelchair tennis event at Rotterdam and at Queen's and, you know, at Eastbourne in the UK. So wheelchair tennis is making steps towards that.
Well, actually, I think we can play a snippet of an interview with Stéphane Houdet, one of the greats of the sport, who unfortunately missed out on bronze this year. This is what he had to say when talking about the sport moving forward.
Fabuleux, c'est cette ferveur, le fait d'avoir.
What's amazing is this fervor, the fact that stands are packed for wheelchair tennis matches. We'll see how Roland Garros goes, but it shows we can have a French public who are able to fill the stands
Susceptible de remplir les stades pour des épreuves.
for wheelchair tennis matches. It's been a long time coming. The Australians were the first to do it, to say, we're going to pack out the centre court. It was the Rod Laver Arena with an Aussie player playing. That means, like the English did in 2012, that if there is marketing around these events and we can put on sporting spectacle, if we are capable of doing that, it would mean there are good days ahead.
Ça laisse présager de beaux jours à nos différentes pratiques.
Well, two things to say. First of all, it's a very cute kid. Secondly, he sounded remarkably like Jean-Emile Jammine, I thought, Stéphane Houdet. But I just want to finish on that. He raises the point that wheelchair tennis can bring in huge crowds. Where's the ceiling with this? Surely wheelchair tennis can grow and grow and grow, because that's what we saw with that final but yesterday. We saw how big it can be and how supporters can come out and watch it.
Yeah, for me, there's no ceiling. Like, I as a disabled person myself, I see a glass ceiling and I try to smash it. And I think we should smash as many glass ceilings as we can when it comes to getting wheelchair tennis on those big stages, in those big courts. You know, I was actually at the Australian Open when they put that first wheelchair tennis match on Rod Laver, and it was an incredible atmosphere. And yeah, true, there was an Aussie playing, but what these games have shown, there were no French players in that final. In that men's singles final, there were no French players. People still came because they appreciated the sport, the drama, the rivalry, everything that people love about sport was there to watch.
Well, one of the sports that's hugely popular every games is wheelchair rugby, otherwise known as murder ball. Earlier on this week, I caught up with Chuck Aoki, co-captain and the most decorated wheelchair rugby player in US history. This is his take on why the sport is so popular.
Yeah, it's a good. I think at least part of it is the growth in sort of para athletes as a whole. I think that there's become more professionalism, more sort of commitment to it, more investment from sponsors and resources to say, hey, let's really invest in these things. We've seen investments in programs cross country Japan, the nation that beat us, was the host, of course, 4 years ago, and they invest a lot of resources in the para sport. So I think it's that, and also I think wheelchair rugby is an exciting sport that people want to play, and so you're seeing teams are not having as hard time finding players; they're just able to recruit more. And I think it's a lot of factors, but the overall growth of it is really just healthy for Paralympic sport as a whole.
And what do you put it down to? Its popularity, because every time the Paralympics roll around, wheelchair rugby is hugely covered, hugely talked about, and hugely watched. What do you put the popularity of the sport down to?
Well, as much as I'd like to say it's my good looks, it's really I think it's a mix of, it's a physical sport, right? Like people colliding, and we know there's lots of popular physical sports out there. American football is very popular in the U.S. Soccer can be quite physical as well. And so I think it's that. There's a sport, there's nothing quite like it. Chairs crashing into each other. But the other part is, too, that I think there's actually a deep level of tactics to it as well, that as people sort of initially see it, they hear it, they see the sounds, they see the crashing. Oh, that's really cool. And then they start to understand a lot of the strategy that goes into it and what's happening there. And so it's kind of got something to offer people at a lot of different levels, which I think is really exciting. And it's also just, a very fast-paced game up and down the court. Like I said, that really has no equivalent. And so I think that it has this, I would almost call it a novelty that makes it really special.
Yeah, Chuck Aoki speaking to me earlier this week. Just to touch on that quickly, Gemma, wheelchair rugby is an example of how exposure can really raise a sport's profile, and not just at the Paralympic Games. Do you think other sports can take wheelchair rugby's example moving forward? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's one of the showpiece sports at the Paralympics, and I think it was even more showpiece this year, because I remember watching it and having a statue of Napoleon in the middle of the venue. I was like, that's new. It was lovely, because it was put also showcasing a part of Paris as well. So you had a showcase sport showcasing a part of Paris, and it felt magical this year, actually, the wheelchair rugby. I mean, I followed the GB wheelchair rugby guys for a long time. I think I wasn't able to go over to Tokyo for obvious reasons. And I remember when they won gold in Tokyo after, they had a lot of funding struggles. They got told they didn't have medal potential. They lost a lot of their funding. And then suddenly they go and win gold in Tokyo. It was a really emotional moment. And I think that's the thing that rugby does well. So people know Chuck Aoki. Why? Because they've invested in his character. When media have covered him, they've not just covered his athletic achievements, they've covered what he's like as a person. And I think just as we, look on court and we want to find out more about Carlos Alcaraz, or we want to, find out more about LeBron James, we need to start looking into the characters of these para-athletes. And I'm not saying we tell the story of their disability and that's how we discover their character. That's not what should be done. We should not see their sporting achievement through the eyes of their disability. What I'm saying is every disabled person has a different personality. We're not all the same. So learn about people's personalities.
It's a very important distinction, isn't it, between someone's personality and their disability, because their disability is
not their personality. It's just, and I think that's the thing where I've seen the media shift as well, actually, this games from previous games, is there's been a lot less focus on somebody's disability and defining their achievement through their disability. Now, I did a lot of research when I was a student about where that comes from, and it comes from that focus, that narrative on somebody's disability being the overriding or overcoming your disability to win a gold medal, which is not what these athletes do. They're elite level. Comes from like 1900, if you've watched The Greatest Showman, it comes from that guy, comes from his shows and stuff. So it's a very old narrative and we shouldn't be using it. And I think what I've seen these games, I mean, I've still heard some silly questions in mixed zones. I heard one journalist ask one of the GB athletes, they said, oh, and of course, you don't really count yourself as disabled, do you, when you can win a gold medal? And I was a bit like, no, that's not what we should be saying to disabled athletes. I mean, you still hear those things and you still have those narratives peddled, but it's been a lot less during these games than I've seen in other games.
Yeah, it's getting better and better. And the main thing to take away is that I need to watch The Greatest Showman, because I haven't seen it yet. Well, of course, every Paralympic Games brings us amazing stories, whether it be Sarah's story showing she's still got it and winning her 19th gold, or Igor Bokis being simply unbeatable. Jean-Emile, let me bring you back in on this. So many good stories and athletes to pick from. Who's your standout athlete from these games?
I'm going to go with a very romantic story, actually, which I think has struck a chord with many viewers. It's gone viral, not so much on the athleticism, but it is a remarkable achievement by the pair, but one of the best love stories in athletics in modern times. Of course, I'm talking about Hunter and Tara Davis Woodhall. Tara Davis having won the women's long jump, the American in the Olympics, and we saw the scenes, and she was greeted by her husband who was in the stands, and that was, of course, Hunter, only for him to then go and win gold in the 400 meters T62 event in the Paralympics. And then she returned the favor, and you can see the images there. They really are just so heartfelt. And it's just a lovely moment, which we forget about the wonders and struggles of the world. And we just look at what sports can do, not only on the track, but off it. I mean, these two they met back when they were 17-year-olds, and they even train with each other, going on the track every day. They do have some differences, obviously, with long jump and 400 meters, but they're with each other all the way, and it's just a brilliant story of resilience, but also compassion, love, and support. And I think it's something that we can all take as a message going forward.
Well, I trust you to pick a love story. Very predictable. Gemma, what about you, briefly? Who's someone who maybe caught your eye at these games, who maybe you didn't expect from?
Well, I'm going to go a bit romantic as well. Actually,
it's just a love show. I'm loving
I know.
it.
Let's just be romantic. In the para-judo, British athlete Christopher Skelly had a lot of problems in the months leading up to these games. Didn't even know whether he was going to be able to compete because there was issues around his classification. And his wife, Louise Hunt, is a wheelchair tennis player. She's former Paralympian, used to compete for GB, and yes, it wasn't the gold that he won in Tokyo, but when he won that bronze, the emotion behind it, like, it was kind of the same as what we've just said. You know, he just ran up to Louise and they both said, "I love you." And it was a really heartfelt moment. And all I hope is, so when Chris won gold in Tokyo, he asked for loads of pork pies. I know that Louise was hoping that he might ask for a car or something, because apparently when he got home, he got a load of pork pies. So I think she was hoping he's going to ask for like a car, a holiday or something, so that they get loads of those instead. So Chris, I hope you have asked for that.
Well, he sounds like a man after my own heart, I've got to say. Well, let's talk about Paris, shall we? There were so many discussions about the city's ability to host these Paralympic Games, with many citing the transport system as a major problem. Well, let's hear what the athletes have to say about their impressions of Paris. First up, Teresa Perales, who won her 28th Paralympic medal at these Games.
It's been very intense. We wanted to meet up with the public again. These games have been very well organized in terms of the punctuality of the competitions, the comfort of the village too. The apartments are fantastic. Where I am, there are 1, 2, 3 of us in wheelchairs, and we've been able to cohabit without any problems with 3 other people who walk. Everything has been well thought out. There's also the ecological aspect, and these sustainable games, competition sites in emblematic places that will enable people to keep a beautiful memory of having competed under the Eiffel Tower, at the Trocadero, a whole host of places that we've always visited as tourists, and now we've been able to enjoy them in a different way.
And what about Chuck Aoki? Let's hear what he thought of Paris as a host city.
Yeah, I think in terms of organization, by and large, the games have gone off quite well. Obviously, with any games, the logistics of moving thousands and thousands of people around is challenging, and so to have no major hiccups has been a great success. You know, the people of Paris have really shown up and shown out. Sold out, packed crowds at our arena over at the Stade de France, at La Défense Arena. Like, it's been amazing to see the city come together and support. I think there's been a few challenges with accessibility in the village itself, because the area they built it on has a lot of sort of bumps and off-roady kind of things, because they sort of just built the village on top of it, and cost an immense amount of money to sort of totally re-landscape an area. But they also found lots of ways to adapt. There's a lot of hills in the village, but they have these sort of mobility scooters you can attach to a wheelchair that essentially make going up a hill no problem at all. So there's been a nice mix of sort of balancing, okay, here's some challenge that we have, but here's at least a mitigation to fix it. But all in all, I would say this is the best Paralympics I've been to, holistically since since London. Tokyo was wonderful. Obviously, we just had the downside with the pandemic going on. But, in terms of just the whole thing, in terms of the atmosphere, the energy, the excitement, Paris has been the greatest games I've been to since London.
Well, that's the athletes, but what about fans, or in this case, journalists? Gemma, as a wheelchair user, what did you make of these games from an accessibility point of view?
I think the venues have been made brilliantly accessible. I mean, for the first time as a member of the press, I have been with the other media. That is game changing. I'm usually sat in a wheelchair seat next to members of the public, trying to do my job whilst also listening to them have their own opinions of the matches, which is great. And you get the atmosphere and you're in the atmosphere. But also you do still need those moments. If I'm doing a live phone in when something's on, it's not ideal for me to be in that position. So the fact they've created accessible booths, the velodrome was perfectly done. I was right behind the other media. I think they've kind of outdone themselves with the venues. I'd say with the transport, it was a bit more of an obstacle course. It was a bit more of a ramps not working on buses all the time, and stuff like that, or ramps being put out in weird places. So I had a ramp put out in front of a tree, and I was expected to wheel off straight into the tree, which was, that was a moment where it was a little bit dodgy. But I think what's happened is Paris has realised that actually their transport system isn't accessible, because even the Metro Line 14 isn't fully accessible, even though it says it is. And I think what I hope from these games is they've had all these disabled people here and they've actually listened to feedback. I mean, that's the one good thing. So I will say from the Transport Hub, from a media perspective, if there have been any problems, you could email into them and they ask for your feedback and they're like, we will make this better. So they're willing to listen to feedback. They're not closing their ears to what's going on. They're willing to listen to feedback. So this is me now saying, I'm really hopeful that maybe in 2-3 years of time, when I'm coming back for Roland Garros, I won't have to drive my car across, the channel. I'll be able to come on the train and I'll be able to get around more accessibly to do my job. That's my one hope, that the legacy is that this really pushes Paris on. And there was some really positive things coming from, the mayor and everything, pushes Paris on to really look at their transport system and make it open for all, really.
Well, Gemma, one word that you mention is legacy. It's a word we always come back to when talking about Paralympic or Olympic Games. I'm delighted to say that we're joined on the line now by Dr. Christopher Brown, who's a senior lecturer in sports development at the University of Hertfordshire and also the founder of Disability Sports Info. First of all, Christopher, thanks so much for joining us. And what have you made of these Paralympic Games from afar?
Thank you. Yeah, I think they've been really, really good. And as some of your guests have been talking about, the sport's been really fantastic, and I think really since London 2012 we've had a few tricky moments for the movement. Rio 2016 there were some issues with the funding and ticket sales. Obviously Tokyo behind closed doors because of COVID. So I think with Paris coming up, there was that test. Could we recapture the spirit and the momentum that London 2012 created? And I think we've certainly seen that in spades. And I think it's been great to see the enthusiasm and the energy that has been present. So I think it's been a really fantastic games.
Talk about that word legacy, Christopher, because these games might be successful in the short term, but how does France make sure that there is a long-lasting effect?
Well, that's $1 million question, isn't it, really? I think just trying to harness that inspiration and that enthusiasm rather than just giving yourselves a pat on the back now and then forgetting about the need to constantly be inclusive and accessible. Is trying to have that constant focus of how can we make things more accessible and inclusive for everybody. So we're talking about the transport just a minute ago. That has to be looked at consistently, so that is delivered and it makes a tangible difference to everybody's day-to-day life. Not being treated as a second-class citizen, that's really important. But also I think when it comes to the politics, that actually all the departments in government, be it transport, be it social care, be it sport, are actually delivering in a consistent way. So, if you're trying to improve sporting participation opportunities or physical activity, make sure you are also supporting, say, people if in terms of benefit payments or in terms of the accessibility of transport or infrastructure, etc. So there needs to be that kind of consistent vision and consistent approach to try and hopefully get a positive outcome long term.
And what metric can be looked at in terms of success? What is success? Because 10 years down the line, what can France look back at and say, look, we have a successful legacy? For example, GB hosted it 12 years ago now. What metric do you use for success?
Well, that's a very tricky question. I mean, I think it depends what you're referring to. If you're looking at sport participation, and obviously you're looking at how many people are participating in sport and being physically active. So hopefully with national measures, you're looking at an increase there. If you're looking at kind of general societal wide attitudes, measuring attitudes, and also I think more representation across the board in terms of society, in terms of TV, for example, are there more fair representations, more opportunities for disabled actors, disabled producers, etc. And also I think if you're looking in 10 years' time, so 2034, it's not an issue to talk about disability or to think about disability. It's just, accepted part of life. I think if you're getting to that kind of stage, then I think the legacy is really positive because it's just another part of life and it's part of the everyday fabric of life. And that, I think, is really kind of the golden legacy that you want to try and have.
How much do you think public perception has changed around the Paralympics as a competition in, say, the last 20 years? Is there still a long way to go, or how has it changed over the last 20 years, in your opinion?
Interesting. I think it's definitely been positive for sure. I mean, if we're looking at 20 years ago, that's Athens, and I think if you compare Athens to now in terms of the coverage and the focus and the interest, there's definitely been a leap forward. I would say that's undeniable, really. But there's still challenges. So, we've got this fantastic sporting event, everybody really enthusiastic and kind of swept up in the momentum. Can we carry on this momentum after the Paralympics? Is it going to be, constant coverage, constant focus, or are we just going to, go back to what it was like before and then 4 years later we get really excited? I think that's a real challenge. Sometimes there's still an issue there in my country in terms of making sure that we have consistent media coverage. That's still an area that's lacking. But in terms of the event, and I think a profile of Paralympians is definitely improved now compared to 2004. There's still funding challenges for some athletes. There's still issues in terms of having access to, the right facilities, maybe also in terms of equipment. And if we're looking across the board in terms of disability, certainly in the UK, if you're a deaf athlete, you don't get funding from our agency, UK Sport, because it's not part of the Paralympic programme. So I think it's important also that we don't just look at the Paralympics as an elite event, but also think about other elite sporting competitions that are also catering for disabled people.
And Christopher, you founded Disability Sports Info. If you could tell us a little bit about that. What's your personal aim with that? Is it the spread of information? What is your aim with Disability Sport Info?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the platform. So Disability Sport Info it started out as a podcast a few years ago, and the focus was me as an academic trying to talk with other academics, but translating their expertise and their knowledge to a wider audience, because there's lots of fantastic research and work going on, but maybe not everyone's aware of it, or it's not necessarily accessible, be it in terms of language or in terms of it's behind a paywall. So my aim was to try and break down those barriers and to make sure that information and awareness of knowledge goes to the right people, and that people are aware of kind of what is right, so to speak, from an academic perspective. So I speak to lots of different experts in different topics. We've got Paralympic Games, grassroots sport, high performance sport, sport spectatorship, etc. And I'm trying to spread the word, not just from a UK perspective, but also globally. We've had some Canadian academics, Australian academics, etc. We've also got a YouTube series. So I've been doing a series on the Paralympics. So at Disability Sport Info on YouTube, been trying to create some content so you can check that out and hopefully become informed, educated and inspired to help research in this area. And that would also be one of the legacies or goals that I have, is getting information to people so we understand how to provide quality opportunities for everyone, but also to get more people researching. I think that's really important because, again, we're then going to hopefully get more insight and also hopefully make the sporting infrastructure and the wider society more inclusive because of that increased focus and awareness.
Christopher Bound, Senior Lecturer in Sports Development at the University of Hertfordshire. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers.
Well, let's cross back over to Cami Knight at Club France, if we can. Cami, do you think something like Club France can help change attitudes towards Paralympic sport in the country? Because it's not just the Olympics that we've seen people flock to Club France for, it's also the Paralympics.
For a lot of them, it's their first time watching the Paralympics, and you know, a lot of people we've been speaking to the past 2 weeks, it's the first time for them now that it's in their city, in their time zone, in their country, and so you know, there are a lot of sports that they'd never heard of. Of course, maybe wheelchair basketball they'd heard of, but like so many others that were just unknown until now. Sorry, there's an absolute party going on in the background. I'm trying to stay as serious as I can be. But yeah, but in the same way that, for example, during the Olympics, people went and supported athletes in sports they knew nothing about, and they didn't know the rules to. I think it's just been that exact same spirit and that same mentality with Paralympic sports, where maybe they didn't know a rule or two, but you know, they just wanted to absolutely support their team. Now, what people are scared of now, and one man was telling me, one man who works very closely with people with disabilities, he said, you know, these past 2 weeks have been an absolute fever dream for him, and it's just been so amazing, and he's just kind of scared that it's all going to come to an end now, that we're going to kind of go back to the way things were. I think that other examples, I know you've been talking about legacy of other Paralympic Games, we've seen that it does have an impact, and you know, people here are very likely to want to tune in to the LA Games, for example, so you know, things won't change overnight, but for sure, I mean, it's gained the hearts of the French people here, absolutely.
Well, Cami Knight, thank you so much. We will let you go, and you can join in with what looks like, quite simply, one of the biggest parties I've ever seen. Cami Knight, thank you very much. Well, talking about legacy, one of the features of these games is the famous Cauldron located in the Tuileries Gardens. The big question, what will happen once it's all over? Jenny Shin tries to answer that question.
This is one of its final flights, and Parisians and tourists alike have flocked here to get a last glimpse of the Olympic Cauldron.
J'ai pas eu l'occasion de venir jusque-là et je voulais vraiment la voir. C'est pour ça qu'on s'est dit, allez, on y va, on va la voir. C'est l'occasion jamais.
Peut-être je ne la verrai plus, puis le spectacle est splendide. Donc je suis très contente de l'avoir vu, c'est magnifique.
Lighting up the sky at 60 meters high, the Cauldron attracts many spectators every evening. There's barely any space available to get any closer, with many settling for any spot on the nearby grass. For some, it's even become a habit.
Ça fait plusieurs fois que je viens la voir, et pouvoir se poser comme ça dans ce cadre-là, c'est hyper sympa.
But will the Cauldron remain at the Tuileries Garden even after the games are over?
Je la verrai bien ici, mais après, voilà, c'est pas moi qui décidera.
On a eu quand même des JO qui étaient vraiment extrêmement beaux, et c'est un petit hommage qui pourrait rester pour cette année 2024 qu'on a eue.
But the designer of the Cauldron is skeptical, as he'd imagined it as an ephemeral piece of work.
We're seeing if it's technically possible. What's certain is that it was not designed for that. The worst thing would be for it to stay, but not in the right conditions.
The decision is now up to the state, the owner of the Tuileries Garden. In the meantime, everyone wants one last photo to keep as a souvenir.
Well, let's briefly move away from Paris, 9,000 kilometres to the west to the city of Los Angeles. And let's look ahead to 2028, where, of course, the next Paralympic Games will be held. Let's hear from a couple of American athletes to see what they think of the Games being held in their own country. First up is Hayley Dans, gold medalist in the paratriathlon.
I mean, yeah, I think just seeing countries that have recently hosted the Paralympics, their fan base has grown so much. I think that parasport is something that a lot of people just don't know exists. And then once they see it, they're all in and they realize how incredible it is. And so I think in the US, that's just something that, unfortunately, a lot of people haven't been able to see. And I think that the games in LA are surely going to change that. That being said, that is something that I've said in the past, but the momentum that the Paralympics had going into Paris was incredible. I've never seen anything like it before. The number of people that were talking about it on social media and the hype that it was getting was, beyond anything I've ever seen. And so, yes, we do have a ways to go, but I also think that we've come a very, very long way.
Well, I, of course, had to ask Chuck Aoki the very same question.
It's absolutely tantalizing. Yeah, I think my plan is to take a little time and rest. I think I've earned a little bit of time off. But then once I've rested up and rejuvenated, it's eyes forward to LA. You know, I'll be 37, so I'll have to work hard to get there. But I would love the chance to compete at home. I would love the chance to play in front of a home crowd, and you know, hopefully bring home a gold medal for the first time. But either way, I'm all in for LA. Like I said, I'm gonna take a little bit of time to rest up, but then we're looking straight at 28.
And Chuck, just one last question. With the games being held in the United States in 2028, do you think that could really help to shift the culture of Paralympics in the US long term, like we saw London 2012, for example?
Yeah, I think absolutely will help shift the culture. You know, we saw, you know, London 2012 really changed parasport in Great Britain for the better. I mean, here we are 12 years later, and GB still has one of the most successful Paralympic teams. That legacy is amazing. And yeah, I think LA is going to be that chance for the United States. I think we saw really great energy building here in Paris for the Olympics and Paralympics, and I think that's just going to lead to even more energy growing in the coming years as we get more excited and realize, oh, the games are coming home. There's the Olympics. There's also the Paralympics. It's going to be a really tremendous and exciting opportunity. And yeah, I think it's going to completely transform Paralympic sport in the United States. I think you're going to get more people involved, more excitement. I'm hoping we're going to have packed crowds. It's going to be a truly landmark moment for Paralympic sport in the U.S. And I think it's going to set us on a platform to be one of the greatest countries in the world at it.
Well, it's a really interesting point, isn't it, Gemma? What hosting a Paralympic Games can do to a country. GB were very successful para country before London, but after London, it's just exploded, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's just got it's been on another level, and I think it's because there was more visibility in London than ever before. I think also Channel 4 taking over the broadcasting. I don't necessarily agree with the Superhumans campaign. If I explain it, it didn't really then put unrealistic pressures on disabled people in everyday life. Because, you know, even I remember going to Rio after the Superhumans campaign, and but I was, you know, it was 2 weeks before I went to Rio, and a guy in a supermarket, I was buying coffee and cake. This is not Paralympian food and drink, is it? Coffee and cake. And he decided to point where Rio was to me, and I was like, no. I think it gave the misconception that every disabled person could be a Paralympian. Well, all I ask people to say is, you're non-disabled, could you be an Olympian? And I think, but actually the Channel 4 narrative this round in the UK has been very different, and it's been less focused on superhumans and more focused on these guys are elite level athletes. So I think actually it's what London did was open the eyes to how we should frame disability. I won't say it's been perfect after London. I mean, we have brilliant elite level athletes and brilliant elite level programs, but there are still some horrible attitudes towards disabled people in our country. I wouldn't say that it's hosting the Paralympics has necessarily changed attitudes wholly for the better in our country. There are you know, you only have to go into social media to see that, really. But it did really, you know, it gave a chance for journalists like me who, you know, these were my sports. These were the people who looked like me. It gave a chance for me to go into a newsroom and say, I want to pitch this story on this sport. And they were like, oh, hang on a minute, I saw that in London. Yeah, that was really popular. Let's do it. It will be an interesting one with America because they, you know, both your guests have said that they're not really known as a country that supports parasport that much. And so it'd be interesting to see the actual effect that it has on US audiences because, you know, I go to all 4 Grand Slams. When I come to France, when I go to Australia, when I go to Wimbledon, it's that you do see crowds. But actually you can go to the US Open, there can be the same players you've seen here at the Paralympics and there's nobody watching them. So that's probably the challenge for the US. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they embrace parasport after this one. I think it has the potential to be game changing, but we'll see. It's kind of legacy again, isn't it, really?
Yeah, all comes back to legacy. But as you say, we'll see. We're nearly done. We're nearly out of time. But before we go, I have to ask everyone if they have a standout moment from these games, starting with James Vasina, if we can. Can we cross back to the Stade de France? There he is. James, what's been your standout moment from these games?
Standout moments, Leo, I'm not going to give you just one, I'm afraid. I'm going to go a little bit longer than that, if I can, under this rain that's starting to get pretty heavy here at the Stade de France. Standout moments. Look, one, the venues. We've talked about that, of course, during the Olympics. A lot of those same venues being used for the Paralympics, that was also something big, and those venues are absolutely magnificent. One of those venues that was pretty incredible was the one for the archery, and that did give place to one incredible moment in particular. Matt Stutzman finally getting gold in his category, finally in the Olympics that he'd been so long looking for, was absolutely fantastic to see. Another one, the swimming, brilliant atmosphere over there, over in La Défense in the northeast of Paris. We've got huge names, the French again managing to make an impact after, of course, we had Leo McGuinn during the Olympics, who got everybody excited. Well, people were coming back to watch the Paralympics because of him and getting an interest in that. When I was speaking to even children over there, who were they? Why were they coming? They were all talking about Leo McGuinn, but thanks to him, well, children have brought this interest into the Paralympics. On that note, just of the children, I just want to bounce back on what you were saying about the tennis earlier on and about the crowds. A lot of the crowds in a lot of these events were actually also a lot of school children. Of course, it was the beginning of school. Great time for schools and classes to go out and have a day at the Paris Olympics, and that's probably also going to be in a way to help this legacy come along. I never went to wheelchair tennis, wheelchair basketball as an outing with my class. That never happens. But I think to have 6, 7, 8-year-olds going to see that, to find this absolutely just as the norm as like other sports, that is something, of course, that any change comes with generations, and that will definitely count. But I'm going to give you, yes, one moment that in particular was important for me, and that was very recent. It was only just last night. Another incredible venue for the blind football. Not just because France are Paralympic champions after beating Argentina, but just everything that came out of that. Yes, it was revenge in a way for what happened at the Football World Cup over in Qatar, but it really embraced everything. And why? This is what I do find quite interesting, is normally when we talk about football in the Olympics, the interest is so and so. I mean, we watch a lot of football enough during the rest of the season. When it comes to the Olympics, something else. But blind football, totally different sport. And to get to see that in front of the Eiffel Tower, what a great advertisement! What great just place for the sport to get for everybody to take interest. And if that is going to give any interest for people, 5.3 million people watched that final last night. Watched France there beat Argentina in a dramatic final on penalties as well. And just to give you a note is that the clubs themselves, blind football clubs in France, are actually open to anybody. So we can go and try it out all together after all of this. So this incredible times, and it'll wrap up here in the Stade de France. It does get, yes, quite rainy, as you can tell behind us. But hopefully that's not going to end the festivities or put any dampen on the festivities. I do want to just say one thing before I leave you, is that we talked about Paris 2024 being a once in a lifetime. I'm ready to bet that we're at least going to have some discussions for something coming up soon. There are many reasons behind that. Hosting the Olympics is difficult, but the success around Paris and how they've managed, it's been a lot of work coming into this, but they've pulled it off in a spectacular way.
James, thank you so much. Please get yourself dry, get out of that rain and enjoy the closing ceremony. Gemma, we just about have enough time. If you can briefly give us, what was your moment of these games? What was a moment you thought, wow, I'm really enjoying this? What really marked you?
The blind football. France winning the blind football. Who knew Brazil could be beaten in that?
Who knew?
Who knew? It was just a lovely moment. And to have it happen under the Eiffel Tower. Again, Paris's commitment to use the city and use the landmarks that we come and see as tourists. And we're like, oh, hang on a minute, I never thought you could play football down here. So, yeah, France's win in the blind football was huge. And, you know, considering Brazil have a player like Jafinho, who is incredible. Like, I've never seen somebody move with the ball the way he does. You know, yeah, France's blind football win has to be up there.
Yeah. Jean-Emile, I would ask you, but we don't have time. Thanks. Well, there we have it. The end of the Paralympic Games and Paris 2024 as a whole. The last 11 days, we've seen over 4,000 athletes competing in 549 medal events, with 16 world records broken. I've got to say massive thank you to Gemma Stevenson. Thank you so much for coming in. Jean-Emile, thank you. Thanks, of course, to James Vasina and Cami Knight out in the field. And a massive thank you to watching. See you in LA in 4 years' time. Goodbye.